Hello everyone, welcome to the third lecture of this GraphQL series. My name is Praveen and I welcome you all to my YouTube channel Java Fun. Today we're going to check what are the major differences between GraphQL and REST. So this may be a question to most of you that whenever you start to compare the technologies, what are the advantages does GraphQL give you for you to move on to the from REST to the GraphQL side. So if you are making any technology choices for your next project or for any new functionality that you are working or designing, what are the things that you need to take care of? So in this particular uh, lecture, we're going to see what are the major differences in the GraphQL and the REST. Okay, so one of the most important difference between the GraphQL and the REST is GraphQL is based or written only with the single endpoint. Okay, so there will be only single HTTP endpoint for your entire project or entire service, which is something like slash GraphQL something, and its parameters will be changing. See here on the left hand side, if you see the slash GraphQL is getting query as a parameter. So every time you want to query a different resource, this query will be changing. So in this thing, we are making a query for that resource. If you want to make a query for some other resource, that will be a different query altogether. But all those will be routed via single endpoint only. In case of REST, as you already know, there will be a endpoint per resource or multiple endpoints per resource depending upon what kind of a data that you want to fetch. So basically, it will be more clearer when we start writing the code. But in case of GraphQL, you'll only have the services or the business logic or the DTOs where you're fetching the data, and endpoint will be same. In case of REST, you have controllers per endpoint, then you have processors, then the controllers has been wired with the resources and ultimately to the DTOs. But in case of GraphQL, you'll only be writing the services. That's it. Okay. Few more differences between GraphQL and REST is, in case of GraphQL, you can basically fetch the data from multiple resources within the same query. So whatever data that you need to show it on your UI page, you're going to fetch that in a single go. So there will be no multiple round trips that you need to make. Also, you don't need to merge the logic of fetching all those resources together within your server side. Those can remain separate, and the GraphQL runtime environment will take care of wiring all those services or the resources together. So in case of REST, as you already know, there will be an endpoint or a controller per resource. So you will be making multiple server side calls if you want to fetch the data from multiple resources. In case of GraphQL, client is basically telling the server what all fields that you want from a particular resource. So there will be no under or overfetching of the data, only the data that it needs to be shown onto the UI side that will be specified in the query, and only that data will be fetched from the server side. In case of REST, there is no such things. You cannot specify out of the resource how many fields that you want to fetch. So basically, generally, that control is not available onto the client side. So client servers will basically be sending you back something called, suppose, an actor object or a JSON representation of actor object, and it has 10 fields. And if UI is only using 2 fields, 8 unnecessary fields that you're sending over the wire. So all that thing will not be there in case of GraphQL. Since GraphQL works with the contract, and that contract is basically a schema that you generate before start working onto the logic, uh, client side and the server side developers can work independently because they already know the contract by which your server side endpoint going to send you back the data. So there is no need for them to collaborate more heavily. So it helps in uh, hastening the development process. So it will be more rapid development in case of GraphQL. In case of REST, it basically need a more collaboration between the server and the client side developers. In case of GraphQL, the business logic is decoupled. All the resources do not need to be tangled together. Since the wiring of the resources is taken care by the GraphQL endpoint. In case of REST, if you want to fetch the data from multiple resources, you need to basically wire them together in the and write a logic for it. So basically, it kinds of create a spaghetti kind of a code, or there will be multiple round trips if you don't do that. So basically these are the major differences between the GraphQL and the REST. So in our next lecture, we'll be diving deep into the code, how to implement the GraphQL using Spring Boot and Java. And hopefully these endpoints going to give you an idea why you need to use a GraphQL over the REST. So see you on the next lecture. Thank you so much. Let's run it now. Now, in the summary, uh, we have seen what are the building blocks of GraphQL. We have seen what is type, what are the scalar objects, what are the data types supported by the GraphQL, string, ID, boolean, float, what are the complex objects, how the complex objects has been created using the scalar objects, what is the query. We have not touched about mutation and the subscription part of it yet. Fragment we have seen, but when we create our own API, we'll be able to modify our resources at that particular point. We'll be touching the mutation and the subscription part of it, but the concept remains the same. The way you create the query, similarly you create a mutation. The only difference is query is just reading the resource information. Mutation is basically updating the resource information. So that brings us to the closure of second lecture in this GraphQL series. Thanks for tuning in, and please do see the next lecture, which is explaining you the difference between the GraphQL and the REST. Thank you so much.